welcome to Night Clerk Radio, episode 68, where this week we are discussing new music, semi-recent releases defined as last few months from old favorites, artists we've talked about before on the show and are big fans of, and one of which, Groceries, is actually coming off a long hiatus, which I didn't realize going into this episode. Like, I'd kind of lost track of time since their last release. And there's the Housewares and Yes, We're Open, which is an album we did on our very first like mallsoft episode way back when. There were those vinyl reissues, which are really great. I got a copy, but I didn't realize that like this was the first new music kind of unannounced in a long time.
Yeah, like when you brought that up to me initially, like I realized I was sort of like grouping Groceries with like Infinity Frequencies as one of those like first wave vaporwave artists that had just kind of like retired, because like, you know, Infinity Frequencies had a similar thing with like released a couple of great albums and then kind of just stopped. But then like recently Infinity Frequencies released a new album and now Groceries is back into it. And so it's like, hey, they're back.
We're getting the genre back together.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, I'm here for it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it just didn't really occur to me until I just did a little bit of cursory research before this episode. And I found like vaporwave subreddit threads from 2018 of like, hey, what happened to Groceries? They stopped releasing music. I was like, wait a minute. Oh my God. That's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
I totally dig this little renaissance. Let's bring back all the greatest hits. Let's bring back all our favorite artists.
Only classics.
Yeah, from the 2010s.
Yeah, I think we've talked a bit about the dangers of that type of nostalgic obsession.
What?
Yep. Yeah. And then, of course, the other artist, just to mention before we get into the music, is the classic collaboration between Equip and R23X, who have been previously discussed in like video game vaporwave. And then, of course, famous because we got the wax cylinders, the Edison wax cylinder physical release they did, which contained 2 tracks that end up on this album. But otherwise, it's interesting because there's not like an intro. There's no thematic discussion. They're just artists we like who release music we want to talk about. It's almost deceptively pure for an episode. Yeah,
I mean, it just shows that vaporwave is sort of maturing as a genre and a scene, I guess, whatever you want to call it. And both of these albums, I think, I'm not 100% sure, are mostly original compositions. There's obviously sampling in both, but like, yeah, it shows, I think, that these artists are sort of like finding a way to, in order to keep working on your art, you have to like have like the economic means to do so. And like, they're obviously achieving some kind of, I think, success that allows them to do that, which is great. Because otherwise, like that's what happened with so many, I think, of the original artists in the 2010s era of vaporwave, is they released a couple albums and then they realized, oh shit, I still have to keep a roof over my head and you know, had to move on. But yeah, I'm very excited to see this new direction for vaporwave.
Yeah. So why don't we just get into the music then?
That is a sample from track 4, Exploring Quartz Temple by Equip and R23X. This is, as you imagine, if you're familiar at all with either artist, you can tell that this is video game inspired, in particular, the video game RPG, particularly, I think, JRPGs, Japanese video game RPGs, Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It is a very, as these kind of video games have grown in sophistication and over the decades, the sort of language of music has become kind of formalized, like in a lot of ways. Like you have types of music for different activities that you do in the game. There's menu music, there's fighting music, there's victory music, there's overlay and travel music. And this album is sort of like a love letter to that language of music, that style, these very particular themes. And it's quite good. It is uses quite a variety of instruments and homages and samples from actual games. And yeah, if you like these kind of games, you will like this album.
Yeah, I agree. Did you play a lot of games from that era, that like SNES through PS2-ish?
Yeah, I did all particularly Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
I played a ton of those. I skipped video game console generations. I went from like Super Nintendo, and I didn't get anything until like a GameCube.
Yeah.
So like, and then the original Xbox. So I missed out. I played like PlayStation 1 and 2 at friends' houses, but I'd never, and the N64, I didn't have one. But yeah, I love, like, I remember playing like Final Fantasy 2 on the Super Nintendo. I rented it at a place, and I rented it so often, and I ran so many late charges that we couldn't rent from that place anymore. Like my parents were like, no, you're not. I'm not paying that fee. Yeah, I could have just bought the whole game with the amount of late fees.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because I was just thinking about this type of nostalgia and how it is from an era that moved so quickly in terms of video game technology. Like we talked about on the Doom episode of like, Doom to Half-Life is 5-ish years, right? So depending on where you fell, you have like completely different reference sets, which is like an interesting thing to me because we had a Genesis. So my reference is like Phantasy Star, for example, and then later playing like PSO when that started. And I didn't have an SNES or anything, so I didn't play like that Final Fantasy 3 at the time or anything, but did have a PlayStation. So then that's like, in some sense, in America anyway, like the real stereotypical like golden era, for lack of a better term. I don't like that term, but I don't know a better one. Of, you got to say Final Fantasy 7.
Oh yeah,
but 8 and stuff was also really good. Chrono Cross, Xenogears, Vagrant Story, Legend of Legaia. Breath of Fire, like all those games come back. And then like I didn't really have a PS2 at times. I didn't play like 10 and stuff. So I was just kind of thinking it's an interesting aspect of like when nostalgia then becomes tied to like technological progress, like you can very quickly just have really subsets. So I thought it was interesting because some stuff like track 5, the airship theme, you always had airships in this game. So that stood out to me more than maybe some others.
Yeah. And it's just for me, like, in a relatively short amount of time, like, a space of a few years, like the stylistic conventions of these genres got so specific and like really rich. And like, there's so many examples of like, there really was an explosion of games. I mean, like, you mentioned FPSs and like, geez, just in those 5 years between Doom and Half-Life, there was a huge number of FPSs that like, hundreds. And like, they all kind of like followed certain conventions. And then, it's just amazing to see how much, and even within those forums, there's a lot of like interesting innovations and like, every once in a while, like watching videos on like obscure games in these genres to find out what these evolutionary dead ends, I guess, to find out, look, here's this game and it did something really cool, but no one played it, so we don't do these kind of games anymore. But yeah, the Nameless Dreams is kind of like an archetypal, like, this is this is a type of music. Like, track 1 is the menu loop. And it does everything a menu loop should do when you're paused. And every single track has that, like, you can tell what kind of story beats this game was going to have, this imaginary game. So it's almost like a concept album when you think about it. But yeah, one thing I do want to mention, though, is with the mini music, I just want to think how many house parties throughout the years have used their background music as the pause menu of some video game. Because everyone's been to at least one house party where like there's a TV with some video game on and it's just on, and there's a looping menu music, and that everyone's just talking and drinking and having a good time. But that's, you're just staring at this fucking paused game. Over this menu game. Yeah.
Not a JRPG, but I think like in my head, the canonical example for that is I Want to Take You for a Ride from MVC2, Marvel vs. Capcom.
Oh, damn.
Because
Yeah.
that was a game we played a lot in the Dreamcast era. And yeah, you would pause like, you got to go refish your Mountain Dew. And just that drum beat and vocal loop is just playing in the background. Do you think the concept album comment is interesting? Because it kind of occurs to me that I guess any like soundtrack for a game that doesn't exist in some sense is like a concept album. You don't really think about it that way, but that's true. One thing I thought was interesting is that it is somewhat like a curated soundtrack, but also has like a little bit of, I don't know if verisimilitude is the right word in this case, of like you're also listening to that music in the context of playing the game. You're not like I bought a soundtrack for a game and I just hear those curated soundtrack pieces.
Oh, yeah.
But like, because the menu loop, even though it does have like a proper fade out, I guess, kind of feels like it just ends like, oh, I've gotten my drink and I'm leaving the menu now in some sense. And then one thing that we both noted prior to recording is track 11, Decisive Battle, into track 12, Victory Fanfare. Decisive Battle, nice title and sample, transitions pretty, air quotes hard into Victory Fanfare, which is exactly what happens in those games. When you deal damage and that enemy's at 0, it ends, right? They fire up, for example, in the Final Fantasy games, they fire up the Victory Fanfare right away. It's not like it doesn't fade out the boss music or whatever until you get to your post-fight stats leveling up screen, and then it plays the Victory Fanfare. It's like, no, when that guy turns red and disappears, hit me with those victory horns. And that's kind of what the album does.
Yeah, the game is programmed to do that. It's just like, oh, as soon as the fight ends.
Victory condition.
Yeah, I totally missed that. Actually, why don't we play the opening of track 11, Decisive Battle? If you're a fan of anime, you'll recognize those opening drums. Because, I love that. Like, there's a lot of homages too in this album to other specific things. So, like, yeah, the Evangelion battle music. But going back to your point, though, I think the game as it is played, as opposed to like the crystal clear studio soundtrack, because that explains the sound effects. Because there's a lot of like environmental sound effects in this album. Like track 2 has a lot of thunderstorm effects. Mentioned the track 5, the airship theme. There's like engine sounds. So like, and then some of the other tracks, their track 3, the Jewel Grotto, has footstep sounds in it. So it's like, oh yeah, it's the game as you were actually playing, as you actually listen to it, not the studio version, which it's like, oh yeah, that puts a lot of context. So there's actually a lot of really good attention to detail of like the actual game experience. So I really like that. And some of the tracks are very short too, to represent like track 9. Unlock Ancient Magic is just like a minute long, and it sounds like your dungeon synth, to represent getting a powerful item or something like that, your plot item. So yeah, altogether this album's pretty short too. So I've listened to it quite a few times. Yeah, it's only 37 minutes long, something like that. But there's a lot of cool little bits. It's very nuanced. Now, the more that I think about it, the more nuanced it is. Yeah,
tons of little details. I think are only realized out of like a genuine interest in what you're creating personally, like, which is like not always the case. Like you pointed out, like really an eclectic set of like timbres and synths and sounds and genres, which is like video game appropriate. Video games, in my memory, like the most interesting soundtracks tend to kind of have a little bit of everything. But one thing that I thought was interesting is, and this may be the result of trying to pull from such a wide, like technological range of games, but I thought that there was a real range in feel of tracks. So like
Mhm.
something like track 13, Goodbye, to me, like all the synth sounds, the structure, a lot of the drums and stuff all feel very like SNES era soundtrack.
Mhm.
But then you look at something like track 6, Why We Fight, that's like very modern lo-fi.
Yeah.
It was just kind of as interesting because like clearly expresses like a range of interests and genres and not all just like chiptune stuff, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is that I thought that there was like an interesting range of stuff that feels just like modern lo-fi and stuff that does feel genuinely as an attempt to emulate older synth sounds. And I appreciate that that's cool. Like there's a lot of glitchiness too, like in that victory fanfare, there's interesting glitches, which I don't really associate with that soundtrack. And I could be totally wrong. And then somebody should correct me if I am. Same with like Flight/Plight, which is the last track, is like kind of glitchy. So I just thought it's kind of, I just thought the range displayed on the album was really interesting given the subject matter, because it would be easy to just do a very like lazy chiptune album.
Yeah.
They don't. They make a wide range of really interesting music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Also, just for the last track, I really like the little stereo beats at the end. That was very, 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 that's very fun. I think, now that I think about, maybe they're trying to, because like the Japanese RPG in particular is really, it's all about the storytelling more than the game mechanics. Like a lot of like Western video game RPGs are all about like,
CRPGs can be very dense.
Yeah, but like the JRPGs are more about like, oh no, that moment when that character you love died, or when this person betrayed you, or like, can I actually save the world, or what does it mean to kill God? Because every JRPG is about killing God. Especially when you're younger and you're not really as experienced in these tropes and these, like the first time you play a story like that, you're like, oh my God, this is the most amazing story ever. And so I think maybe more it's about the emotional experience of playing the game rather than the actual game soundtrack itself. So like the glitches and stuff like that. And, yeah. So I don't know. That's a interesting point. Yeah. It's not exactly like, it's not meant to like replicate it perfectly.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I think there's a reason why JRPGs resonate so much with their fans, and it's because of the emotional connection that the storytelling gives them, and the music is a key element of that. Like, we're like the ending where it's like it's always bittersweet in a JRPG, right? Like we've saved the world, but now we must part ways and go off to our destinies, or I have to sacrifice myself. Goodbye, that kind of thing. And yeah, it's kind of wistful, and I think it's also because of like some of these tracks are more like influenced by like lo-fi beats and like vapor trap to a degree. It's a good album, is what I'm saying.
I think it's a really great album. And I think if you're interested in any sort of video game music or just like good vaporwave, chiptune, VGM type stuff, I think it's definitely something you should check out. That was a little bit from about 5 minutes into track 2 of the album Our Shop, as translated, from Brooklyn-based mallsoft vaporwave artist producer Groceries, who, as I said before, has done kind of 3 previous very well received mallsoft albums. Yes, We're Open, Housewares, and Ascension. And they also have a lo-fi house project under the name Null Object, which I haven't had a chance to check out. I just found out about its existence. I feel kind of bad about that. This album is 2 tracks. released in August of this year, which is 2022. I guess if you're listening in the future, don't have the date that this was recorded, and is just I loved this album. Like I thought it was a really interesting blend of just kind of everything I love about ambient in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
The most parts that stand out to me, although there are not a lot of parts of it that would not be classified as ambient. It's got everything from like trip hop to triumphant synth, which you heard in the opening sample, to space synths. Just a really fascinating album all around.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I quite liked it as well. I think this album is themed around closing down for the day, like the end of the business day, because again, like this is all thematically connected, to opening the store, running the store, doing online shopping, and then now shutting down for the business day. And it's so varied and so interesting. Like it really opens like as a beat tape, kind of like a very trip hop opening vibe, very strong, and then it kind of mellows out, and then it's a full journey, and it's something new and interesting to listen to as you're going through it.
I do want to talk about your point about being about closing down and the structure of the album in general, because as it's released on Bandcamp, it is 2 tracks, which are both roughly the length of a side of vinyl. Basically about 23 minutes each. Well, one's 23 and one's 19, but one is they're kind of like 2 sides of vinyl. But people have posted in like random rate your music style posts, I guess I'll say, like track listings pulled from somewhere, which I am not clear exactly where that comes from. I don't know if it's like an old tweet or like some preview of some physical release I don't know about, or just something that was lost to the ether, because I don't actually know what they're referencing. But they do say that they have like track names and times, and the times do match well to transitions in each of the longer tracks. And the titles do make sense. So I don't know if they're totally made up, some user going into it. But like some of the track titles are for the opening of side 1, like the first few minutes or so, which I thought was like these like sweeping samples into like this down tempo like trip hop. This is one you said reminded you of like 90s trip hop. That's called This Was the Last Day, according to this. The sample I played, which was like in my mind, it's like fairly triumphant synth. Like that's probably like one of my favorite parts, because it's like this like these mellow warm synths, and then like this synth bass and drums come in, and the like synth melody is repeated from a slower piano piece on the first side. It's like a different, version of it. And that part is allegedly called Elegy, which is also funeral departing related.
Yeah.
And then the track that I loved the most, which is like the last half or so of side 2, is called Now Where Are We Going? If you go by this comment.
Yeah.
So I think that all matches in with what you identified as like some sort of closing out. So if this is, really like the 4th album of a 4-album cycle that Groceries wants to do, it's the last Groceries album, maybe. I don't know. But I think that plays out both in the structure and the track titles and the actual content of the album. So I was just providing some supplementary evidence to your claims.
Well, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So that kind of makes more sense, right? Like that instead of having like a 20-minute track that's like really varied, it's like, oh, okay, this is actually like 4 or 5 tracks that are. Yeah, that makes a little more sense. But just in general, like the sort of progress from sort of like more upbeat and active, and then gradually the album becomes more and more ambient as it progresses. With some, I mean there's some variations. Like there's some sections that are really just like field recordings, like walking through a place with crickets at chirping. But Grocery started sort of like as a very plunderphonic mallsoft artist, but like I think so. I'd be really interested to know like how much of this is sampled versus original. But like there's such variant, because like you said, he started trip hop, but like the end of track 1, which would be considered Enlightenment, is like utopian virtual. Like it's very crystalline business like kind of synth stuff. Like it's very. Which I like, and it's just like I was not expecting it from Groceries, I'll be honest, but I'm here for it.
The business callback is kind of interesting. I didn't really hear it as like utopian virtual business stuff, although I get it when you say it. Like I don't disagree, but it did feel very montagey to me. A lot of auxiliary percussion, a lot of those like drawn out synth arpeggios and stuff. Like I do have like some weird little media association with that being like pensive or thinking, which I guess you can be that or those things about business and marketing if you want.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't my first thought. And then this one, much like the Equip R23X album, it has a lot of it's really made in the details to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because the individual tracks are great too. But I actually think even with seamless playback, I think the track transitions on this album are some of the most interesting parts to me. Just little bits of like environment and texture. And often the next track is like distant and feels like it's like coming into like auditory focus, whatever that equivalent is, not just fading in, but like it's becoming clear.
Yeah.
And everything.
Yeah.
Like especially the transitions that really stood out to me are on track 2, where there's like this like pulsing synth transition sound that feels very like public access TV logo to me.
Oh yeah.
Or like it feels like it would be on like Check It Out or something. Like as the logo comes up in the corner, or like wake up, coffee with Sandra in the morning or something. And I love all that stuff. All the nature sounds. There's like voices. There's like distant voices talking on a phone.
Mm-hmm.
All these little details. But for me, what really made me realize how much I like this album, because I know I've talked about this before, but my like general listening approach is I kind of listen casually while working and stuff, and then do more detailed listens. Like on my first casual listen, like if something really catches me, that's usually a good sign. And the last track, now where are we going? We're going by this track listing, which is the last 7-ish minutes of the second track, is like exactly what I want out of ambient. Like we independently said, you said Philip Glass, and then we both agreed like Eno type.
Yeah, Brian Eno.
Yeah, because there's like gentle piano and like staccatoed keys, and, like other synth textures come in, but there's really just like these like piano and chime arpeggios, and then you're kind of kept from drifting too far out of time by every so often the piano hit this big deep bass pedal note that just kind of like rings out under everything else for a few bars. I love that. And I did like a little nostalgia mea culpa on that one, because I always make fun of recent nostalgia, but like I had to fly a lot of long flights when I was in grad school, either going to Europe or down to South America. And my like go-to album for long flights was Music for Airports by Brian Eno, because the first track is a like long, slow, pensive piano piece. It's just a few notes, and it was just very soothing. Like I would just put it on as soon as I kind of got through security and boarded and was like seated. I would always put that on. So like 2014 through 2016, listen to that album probably 100 times just by virtue of flying all the time. And like, so I'm now, I must quit the show, as I am now a victim of recency nostalgia.
Oh no.
I'm sorry.
I'll never forget you, as your face fades onto a cloud.
Yeah. I just had them. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot how I hadn't really listened to it since. I kind of forgot. Like, damn, I really love that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's always that weird experience when you encounter music that you used to listen to a lot, but you haven't listened to recently for like years or whatever. You're like, oh yeah, that was a part of my life. And yeah, it also like, it kind of shows like the difference between like the kind of ambient, like ambient, is stereotyped as just like, my washing machine made an ambient album last night. It's just like a droning, repetitive thing anyone can do. But like, there's a sophistication and like, there is artistic intent and like skill behind really good ambient. And there's sort of like a level of nuance and subtlety that is hard to pick up on. But there's a reason why Brian Eno's, Music for Airports is a classic. And like there's thousands of other albums that try that and they don't work.
Right.
It's really good to see that, like I really hope Groceries does more ambient work, and really excited to see what direction he takes next. But I really liked it too. It was really a perfect send off for the album. I haven't listened to it. Like for me, Philip Glass, because, I'm a huge fan of Koya Nascazzi and a lot of that. But like, a lot of and Philip Glass is more bombastic usually, but like the softer Glass pieces remind me of that. I mean, it's that sort of era of ambient music, like the 70s, 80s, when non-meat was sort of coming into its own as an art form and sort of like taking from like classical music and that kind of like composer, this music is composed.
And like that early experimentation with like ease of access to like extensive multi-track recording and other like technological innovations of the time. Cause that's where, I think around that era is also where the Brian Eno quote you always give about analog instruments and stuff comes from. I'm pretty sure is from that time period.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just a difficult to capture time of experimentation.
Yeah.
But I think the last 7 minutes of that track, if it's, thought of as one track by the artist, whatever that part is, I unironically found it like really moving. Like it was, I really, really enjoyed it. And I'd love to hear more experimentation, more thoughts in that direction. I think that stuff is fascinating. And maybe they're done with it and that's fine too. Like you should create what you want, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
for me, like this album came out and I only knew about this album because I follow Groceries on Bandcamp. And I got the email. It's like, oh, the new album. It's like, wait a minute, that's not a vinyl reissue of one of the albums I'm familiar with. Like, what's all this about? And like, there hasn't been much like notice. There hasn't been any physical media releases as of this, recording that I know of. And yeah, it's really good. Like, I hope it gets more attention. Like it definitely deserves it. I think it's easily on par with Yes, We're Open.
Yeah, I think I almost probably liked it. I think it might be my favorite Groceries album, but I'm probably extremely biased towards some of the ambient work.
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, I'm biased towards Yes, We're Open because, that's my nostalgic thing. It's like, that was one of my first vaporwave albums that I like. Yes, I'm going to get into this genre. Yeah,
totally. Well, buy it. Support artists.
Yep.
So thanks for listening. I hope this little discussion of some recent releases has convinced you to go check out this music and support these artists. For our next episode, though, we're going back into the Discord mines. So on our Patreon Discord, we have a lot of people who are interested in a wide variety of music. So we get a lot of recommendations for stuff I'm completely unfamiliar with or don't realize that an artist has a new release or something. So it's been about 6 months. So we're going to do our Discord cleaning, go through, find some cool stuff that people have shared and share it with you. So a bit of an ensemble sampler next episode. If you do want to be involved in that discussion and maybe recommend some music before we record that episode, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/nightclerkradio, where we do probably 20 some bonus episodes now, or just 20, just crack 20.
Yeah.
Patreon Discord. We're posting some essays from a book we're passively working on in our what free time we have.
Intermittently.
That's a much better word.
Yeah.
That's why you get to do the marketing, Rob.
Yeah. Well, I'm paid the big bucks. Yeah.
Paid the big bucks. And just in general, a bunch of bonus content. And like I said, a Discord where you can chat with a cool community. Otherwise, you can find us at Night Clerk Radio on Twitter. I am at Burke McBurkinson. Ross is at Ross Payton. We are Night Clerk Radio pretty much anywhere else. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, etc. Wherever you do choose to interact with what we do, take a moment to rate, review, let the algorithm know you like what we do. And then we always advocate a little word of mouth. Make friends, build community, talk to them about what you're interested in. And if this happens to come up, great. Catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.